and welcome to the Forward Unto Dawn podcast. I'm David, and I'm joined by my usual co-host, Dani.
Hello.
And a special guest, ToaFreak.
Hey.
Why don't you introduce yourself, Toa, to people who may not be aware of your career?
People not aware of me, are you kidding? No. Hey there, guys. I am ToaFreak. I run the Halo Canon YouTube channel. That's pretty much the only notable thing about me. So, yeah.
And what is the Halo Canon channel? Explain it to us.
That's a good idea. So, essentially, it is a YouTube channel that focuses on the lore of Halo in its many different sources. Back in the day, there's always been a lot of Halo YouTube channels, but they've usually been news or machinima or multiplayer driven in some manner. And I never really saw one that was dedicated, not only dedicated to the lore, but at least in my opinion, got the lore quote unquote right. For lack of a better word there. That's a very pretentious word, I suppose, to use when describing oneself, but it's probably the best way to get it. Basically, I saw a lot of people getting shit wrong, and spreading around misinformation, especially stuff that was very easily verifiable in one form or another. So, started my own YouTube channel to try and get the good word out.
And we'll put a link in the show notes so people can check that out on their own time. But we have brought Toa here to discuss some of the new Halo book-related stuff that's come out. We're still waiting until Halo Wars 2 for new game things. But in the meantime, 343 has been putting out a lot of book stuff, actually. We've got a bunch of new stuff announced. And recently we've had two big releases. One is Halo Mythos. I guess you could describe it as sort of a successor to the Halo Encyclopedia, mashed with an art book, mashed with, bits of the Halo Story Bible. And then also Halo Fractures, which is basically much more straightforward spiritual successor to Halo Evolutions, which is a short story collection that 343 put out early on in their career, taking over for the Halo franchise. 2009, right? Or 2010?
No, 2009. Yeah. It was one of their very first official works under the 343 moniker.
Okay, so we're going to talk about both those things today.
Can I just, before we actually go into that, can I just say that they've announced a new book, and this book in particular might resonate with a very particular slice of our audience and friends. It's Halo Warfleet.
Oh my god!
Guide to the spacecraft of Halo. I don't know if you guys have read any of the old Star Wars books, but one of the most awesome books is the cross-reference books. They basically deconstruct the technology of the ships, the Death Star. They do it for Star Trek as well. Look at the inner workings and scales and just the. It's really
how everything works.
Yeah, how shit works. Yeah,
I've been asking for that sort of thing for years. It's about damn time, and they're getting the guy who did those cross sections for Star Wars to do some of the ones in the Halo books. So it's going to be top quality work.
Look for incredible cross sections and those stuff, and you can see what these things are. But are they going to do? They've said I think there's going to be 10. Of the cross sections in there, and I really want them to do Pillar of Autumn just so they can try and actually pretend like the Warthog run fits in the Pillar of Autumn. Instead of, technically I think Stephen Loftus did a great examination going by the actual geometry. The Warthog run sticks out a kilometer out the side of the Pillar of Autumn. It's perpendicular to everything else.
Yeah, the run is 3 kilometers long, and the Pillar of Autumn is 1.17 kilometers long. So I would be interested, though, I'm sure the Pillar of Autumn will be in there, because that's definitely one that a lot of fans really want to see, that whole hexagonal cross structure. I'm misusing words here, but you know what I mean. That essentially made it such a nearly indestructible hunk of metal during Halo CE, and I would love to see how maybe what the canonical version of the Warthog run would have been, essentially.
And also along those lines, so we've got the Warfleet coming out, and we'll talk about it later. But we've got two new novels coming, which tie into Halo Fractures.
Actually, 3.
Oh, yeah, you're right. 3.
Yep.
So there's, we'll get into that more, but there is a crazy amount. I thought that Halo 2015 was going to be the big time of Halo stuff, but actually we're getting crazy amounts coming for everything else too, which is great.
Very great.
Yeah, so Halo Mythos, I guess you can say that to me it seems sort of like a peek in the story Bible, because it's basically an illustration of things that we generally haven't seen before.
I'm pretty sure there's actually a quote somewhere that says that it does have information straight out of the story Bible to some degree.
Why would it not? That's exactly what you expect of this kind of product, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So,
and it's also interesting because it's unlike the Halo Encyclopedia. It's done much more. I guess you would say it's more lore focused. They say it marks the first time the book incorporates the entirety of the Halo canon.
It's literally a telling from the Forerunner Precursor Wars all the way up to the end of Halo 5, or more accurately, the very beginning, or even just before Halo Wars 2. And it's not only what's interesting about that, at least I found this very interesting. Obviously, the real world reason why it stops there is because they don't want to spoil anything. But there's also an actual in-universe reason for that. Because a very cool thing they did with Mythos, and they've done this with a few other Halo media, Halo Mythos is an in-universe artifact. It is a account put together by an AI called Curator. He was a human AI sent out to the Ark with the Rubicon. So if anyone knows about some of this pre-Halo 4 material, that the 11th Hour reports, they talked about this ship, the UNSC Rubicon, which was sent out to the Ark because of some signal that Oni detected, and basically it went missing after that. So Curator was stuck there. It can't interact with the galaxy, but apparently the records of the Ark are very in-depth about Forerunner history, and Mythos is his work.
Yeah, it's definitely I think that's really, I think, one of the signature stylistic elements that I think 343 has cultivated is with the 11th Hour reports, with catalog, with Curator, and Halo Mythos, that they do spend a lot of time giving information in a in-universe standpoint, even if it's outside of the main media, which I appreciate. You can also be cynical and say that it makes it a lot hard. It's fun for fans to argue about, and then if something gets changed later on, they can just say, well, that was only that character telling you that. Maybe not.
It does create some an easy out for if things do need to be changed. Like they did that with Halo. They had that with the Halo Legends Origins 1 and 2, where it's like, here's Cortana's interpretation of the history of the Forerunners, not necessarily the official version. So gave them a lot. They could show off a lot of stuff at that one point in time, but weren't necessarily tied down to any of the visuals shown or any of the specific story elements presented. It's fun for fans, but it also works well for 343 and from a storytelling standpoint. Yeah.
Well, so I, sadly, because I have no space in my New York apartment, so I can't buy physical books anymore. It makes me sad. I have not actually gone through Mythos myself, aside from seeing the stuff that got leaked online. But Dani and Toa, you both have the book, so what are your overall thoughts on it?
Well, I'll say this. I absolutely love this book. When he first heard it announced, obviously there was a lot of hype about that. When they said it was this chronological telling of the Halo universe, that seemed like a really cool direction to go. But when I saw it, because it's actually it's maybe half the size, more or less, in terms of pages, compared to the Halo Encyclopedia, and that has a shit ton of information, even if there's a shit ton of wrong information in there. I was initially worried when I first saw the actual size of the book, but after reading it, for as general an overview as it presents, there is a surprising amount of very specific and enlightening information for even the most lore savvy of Halo fans.
Yeah, for sure. The one thing I really appreciated was the fact that they fleshed out some parts of the lore that really didn't need additional fleshing out, but it works for our benefit. All the prehistory essentially for humanity between essentially what's right now and what our future is in terms of the games, like the Rainforest Wars, and I just like that they dug into that a little bit. We got some visuals for some of that stuff. The thing is, that content and the fact that they done something for it means a lot more to me as a fan than a million Master Chief collections. You know what I mean?
Oh yes, absolutely.
So that's what I appreciated the most. The fact that there's little snippets in there that don't need to be in there. They don't really do anything for the average fan, but for the people that care, they're entirely more meaningful than anything else.
Oh yes. Actually getting to see like some of that early stuff was just amazing. Seeing the early years, like the 25th century years of the insurrection, or early 26th, like pre-Spartan, was pretty cool as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's not relevant to Halo 6 or 5 or Halo Wars 2, but the fact that it's in there.
Yeah, and I definitely know that the Rainforest Wars fans are a very tiny but hardcore lore group. The people who hung on that, basically a paragraph in the official Xbox timeline years ago. Yeah,
it's mentioned in there. I think Fall of Reach actually had like one of Mendez's favorite books. I think it was like something about there's like a soldier's tale about I think it was called about the Rainforest War. I might be wrong about which one it was, but I know it was like this one throwaway line about this really ancient, at least in terms of the Halo universe, war. And ever since then, I've been wanting to read about that. And yeah, then like you said, the Xbox.com timeline from 2001, where they talk about the Mars campaign, the first time they are using what essentially would become the ODSTs, and it's like, I want that game. I want to play as those early ODSTs dropping over Mars to take on the fascists and the communists, essentially.
Cool. Anything else about Halo Mythos want to talk about before we go into the Halo Fractures?
The one thing I wouldn't mind bringing up is, and this is cool from a story element point of view, is the whole the AI curator. Going back to him briefly, he talks about at one point he can like feel the created out in the galaxy, and he talks about like, for once I'm thankful I can't interact with anyone because I don't want to get, I don't like the created. They're kind of assholes. So a little hope that not every AI is like just wholeheartedly joining Cortana. So
yeah, and he's a different kind of AI than I think we've gotten for the UNSC, because it basically seems like his entire role is he's going to be on the Ark until he dies. Basically, he's just, I guess
Mythos basically ends with him initiating final dispensation, or at least preparing to. So
yeah, and by
the time Spirit of Fire is like rolling in, he's going to be gone, sadly.
Yeah, but that's even at his best situation, he would just be, well, I'm just going to be here cataloging things until I go crazy, and then I guess they'll replace me because there's going to be way more than 7 years of stuff to organize here.
Like 10,000 years actually. So he could have kept at it and he would have been done by the time Master Chief and Blue Team were woken up. Had Cortana's plan gone off without a hitch.
So moving on to Halo Fractures. This came out September 20th, a little after Mythos. And like I said before, it's really a successor to Halo Evolutions in that it's a bunch of short stories by a bunch of different writers. There's many who have been previous Halo authors. There's Frank O'Connor, Brian Reed, Joe Staten, Tobias Buckell. I forget how to say his name. Is it Buckell or?
I've always said Buckle, but I've never heard an official pronunciation.
But it's a bunch of people you've already heard from in the Halo universe: Matt Forbeck, Troy Denning, and then a bunch of new people as well. And I guess before we'll go into each of the stories, but overall, what are your guys' thoughts and impressions?
You know what? I was disappointed with the collection on the basis that I was expecting it to be a collection of stories like Halo Evolutions. All the Halo Evolution stories it seems could stand on their own. They were self-contained, little awesome stories. I felt this collection, as good as it is, by the way, this is not critique on the quality of the writing for the most part. But I felt as if you needed to be clued in on a lot of different lore nuggets and books and stories to even get these characters, because they're all like little continuations of other things that happened. Yeah, so it's like if you're a new reader and someone gave you this book would be significantly less relevant or interesting to you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. As it's something that definitely requires some knowledge, some foreknowledge, or at the very least, you're going to be better off if you have some foreknowledge about it. Like even a lot of the stories, I still think like they don't rely too much on what came before, in that it's more like you'll be better off knowing about it. Like, let's look at Matt Forbeck's Lesson Learned. I think it was at the very beginning. Where it picks up in the middle of Halo New Blood. Now you're going to be it'll be a richer story if you already know about that, or if you've already read Ghosts of Onyx and Halo Glasslands. So it's a much richer story in that regard. But at the same time, I think they leave it. There's enough extra explanation in there that a more casual fan could probably read it, and rather than being utterly confused and nothing else, they'll be like, I wonder what's going on here. Let me see if I can find out, and be intrigued to find either, in the case of that particular story, the sequel to it, which is coming out next year, or looking into the Halo lore a little further. So I definitely agree with what Danny said, but at the same time, it's like I can get, it's kind of a mixed bag is what I'm trying to get at.
It seems like really you need to know that humanity and Covenant fought at one point, and you need to have played Halo 5, I think. And that's
a little bit. It depends on each story. Like,
I do appreciate that they as opposed to Halo Evolutions, each story has a preface that gives the timeline and some basic background details.
Oh, yes. That's something I absolutely loved.
So while it jumps around, it tells you this takes place during the end of the Covenant War, or this takes place several years after, this takes place...
Or this takes place in the middle of this book.
Yeah.
Like, I think Lesson Learned actually does reference New Blood. And I know the Christy Golden story... which is a follow-up to the Forerunner saga, directly names those books, or at least names the sagas. So at least if you have no idea what's going on, and that's a particular story I've heard from the casual fans that are either casual fans or fans that just never got around to the Forerunner saga, said they were utterly confused about what was going on. So
yeah,
to Danny's point earlier.
I mean, that's kind of the problem with any sprawling universe, is that you can't babyfy it enough that people can slip in easily. Not that babyfying, that makes it sound bad, but you just, it's hard to do. And so this seems like the concession along the lines of in old 70s, 60s, and 70s comics. They would have the little asterisks, and then, by the way, this happened in issue 15 of The Amazing Spider-Man. So it's a way to probably make sure you aren't as lost, and that you can sort of figure it out, backfill your information if you want to later on, which is helpful.
Yeah.
Can I just say as well, one thing I want to point out for all the content of the book, and I'm sure we have some interesting things to say about some of the other stuff, but the Ballad of Hamish Beamish was a self-masturbatory waste of f***ing time that I really did not like.
I love that. Come on.
No, seriously, no. It was pointless.
Because people had been asking for it. People wanted to know.
It added nothing, and it shouldn't have been printed.
He put it in there because fans had been asking. They wanted to know about Hamish Beamish. I wanted that story, and I think the ballad was the best way to do it.
God, no. God.
We learned that
waste of everyone's time.
Danny does not like limericks. I don't know. I definitely had a different reaction to it, because even though I knew it was going to be in it, it's sort of this collection's odd one out, in that it's bizarre and doesn't tie into anything else. I understand your point, Danny. However, I disagree with it in such strident terms.
Again, like, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but at least from what I've seen, it's been a largely well-received particular piece of fiction. But I can understand where Danny's coming from, at least.
I want to say I really respect Frank as a writer. I really like what he does, and I was expecting something new from him, and I got that. Just made me kind of angry.
Well, to be fair, he had already written out Saint's testimony, so
I don't count copy and pasting an existing title like they did with that and Shadow of Intent into the book. They fleshed out to be a welcome addition to this collection.
What I would have loved to see originally is if they had taken, I think it was New Blood was the other digital one. But yeah, New Blood, Saint's Testimony, and then Shadow of Intent as its own mini collection in addition to Fractures. But at least they got it in print, which is what I'm thankful for in the regard for those two stories. The last thing I'll say before we get into the stories, to Danny's point about Halo, the comparison to Halo Evolutions. Halo Evolutions is definitely, like, overall, I think it's a better collection because, as you said, it's a bunch of these standalone stories, and even better, it's these complete stories. A lot of the stories in Fractures are like prologues. Some of them actually, entirely literally, again, because I keep coming back to it, Lesson Learned is a prologue to Halo Legacy of Onyx, which is coming out in April of next year. Into the Fire is a prologue. I think the sequel is called like Smoke and Shadow. But that's another one. It's a prologue. But at least in the case of Into Fire, that was actually pretty damn good for what it was. And it's not, I'm not saying this as a slight to those stories per se, but yeah, I would dock some points just a little bit from Fractures for that. Still good though. Still absolutely good.
Yeah. All right, so let's go through, starting with Lessons Learned. That's by Matt Forbeck, who wrote the novella New Blood before, and he's writing Halo Legacy of Onyx, so as we talked about, this ties into that. And it follows the Spartan 3s, Lucy and Tom, after their service with Blue Team, and it picks up right in the middle of New Blood, and it ties into Halo Glass Lands as they end up on the giant shield world, Trevelyan, which...
I think you mean in it?
Oh, yeah, sorry, in it. And yeah, this actually surprised me because after, it's got to be, 4 or 5 years now, Danny, they deal with how the whole shield world can pop into existence without destroying the entire solar system.
Oh, yeah, in real world, yeah, it's been, I think that was like 2011.
Onyx is the elephant in the room on the Halo franchise because if you take that thing by itself, what it is, the hyperstructure, because it's not megastructure, it's a hyperstructure. It's the size of a solar system. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the greatest thing. No one. Yeah, it's the greatest technological entity, achievement, object thing that we'll ever come across in Halo.
Yeah.
The way narratively the thing's treated, it's treated like Area 51. It's just, oh yeah, let's go to Area 51, do our wee secret experiments. You know what I mean? It's treated like it's just a wee base that we do things on in secrets. It's like, this is the greatest technological discovery of ever. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing in the whole galaxy that touches this. We should be fighting over this damn thing. The fact that it's just sitting there, and sometimes we use it for stories, sometimes we don't. Depends who at 343 remembers it exists. You know what I mean? So I'm glad we're getting a book about the legacy of Onyx. I'm glad we got this story. Like Halo 5 and 6 and 7 and 4 are completely irrelevant to this thing. You know what I mean? I can't understand it. This thing should be the most important thing in the Halo universe right now.
I know some fans, especially in the wake of this story, were saying there's been this whole craze about potentially going back to Reach right now. There's a small group of fans who are saying, you know what? Let's go to Trevelyan because this thing is massive, as you said, and God knows the secrets that it contains.
To be fair to the UNSC, I think that the fact that it doesn't apparently destroy all sentient life puts it down a few rungs on the research ladder.
Does it kill us? No. Well, it's not that important. It does have the entire Forerunner fleet there, doesn't it? It has its own fleet, as far as I remember. It has
it did have a whole lot of Forerunner tech.
hundreds of thousands of ships.
Yeah, the engines for Infinity came from Trevelyan.
Well, and I'm hopeful that with Legacy of Onyx, they'll dip into exactly why no one was there. I mean, admittedly, there could be Forerunners on it for all we know because it's so huge, and it just could take us years to find them, basically. But hopefully the book, the follow-up, goes into that.
But the thing is, right, if you look at the scale of this thing, and imagine there's a massive human migration, right? And we put millions of people going there every month even. We couldn't fill that thing.
I think at the height of humanity's humanity's highest population, just prior to the Covenant War, I don't think you could have you could have put the entire human population in there, and you probably wouldn't even take up even a small percentage of its total space.
Why don't we just put ourselves there as a backup little seed of humanity in case we get f***ed over again? Because we're always getting f***ed over by something in Halo.
I mean, to some degree, we kind of are with the fact that there's an operation set up there. Theoretically, it can always be shifted back into slip space.
Yeah, that's our backup essentially. You know what I mean? In case the Covenant 2 or Covenant 3, whatever the hell they are, come and wipe us out again or whatever. Well, just
Covenant
take
2,
Earth.
Electric Boogaloo.
Just take Earth this time. We got somewhere better. It's bigger than Earth. It's better. Just take Earth. Go on. You know what I mean?
They do have the added little details that Mendez is there, and the Spartan 3s are going to be assigned there, and they've basically got a Sangheili human alliance kind of going on in there, like a joint operation, which is kind of interesting, and I'm sure they don't know about, oh yeah, and we were also researching biological weapons to use on you guys over there, but don't pay attention to that.
Yeah. We get confirmation that Spartan 3s are wearing Mjolnir, so if anyone was curious, because I know that comes up on our Halo story every now and then.
Yeah, and we get a cool zero-G action sequence at the beginning. Other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's not bad, not amazing. It's definitely
it's
setting
good.
things up.
It's a nice setup.
Yeah. Okay, and then the next story is What Remains, and this follows
this I love.
A character, Evelyn Collins, who was briefly in the Halo 5 intel, and then she's a radio message on Meridian during the campaign, and it's basically a short story written by Morgan Lockhart, following
narrative director for Halo, for the Halo franchise. But if anyone's curious, so she's a 343 employee, and she did a really good job on this one, in my opinion.
Well, so it basically follows Evelyn Collins after she sends this doomed message when the Guardian takes off, and she and a few people are left behind. Honestly, I didn't like this as much as I thought I would.
Blasphemy.
Because I think that the addition of mission intel was basically the best thing that Halo 5 added, because I am a huge fan of BioShock, and despite the fact that I find the gameplay actually really tedious and annoying and finicky, but I always loved that you could explore and find these little clues onto like the everyman, and just these little side stories are playing out even when you were doing other things. And so I really like that the mission intel added that. And the only thing is, this story to me didn't add anything to Evelyn's story that I thought was worth the time almost. What did you think, Toa?
I loved it. I thought it was great. I loved following up on Evelyn Collins and Meridian in general. I loved seeing Evelyn's experience as a survivor of the original glassing of Meridian play into, this story. She meets up with these other survivors, some of who are pretty gravely injured, and they're like, look, we just gotta heal up and hope that rescue comes. And Evelyn's like, no, guys, that's not how it works. We have to actually make an effort, or no one's going to come looking for us, especially these days, because nobody, Leading Dortmund doesn't really care about us, and the UNSC probably won't either. And she doesn't say that, but you get what I mean. So, personally, I really enjoyed it. I liked seeing that her colony expertise coming into play and all that jazz.
I guess what I didn't like about it was just the ending, in that we get some character beats, and then they send out a signal, and Cortana says, okay, cool.
I like that. Like, I can understand that it's like there's no real character development for them, but I like the idea at the very end that Cortana reaches out and says, "Meridian, we're on our way," yada yada.
And of course, you don't know if that's actually good or not. Yeah.
There's no character development. There's no story development. They're trapped in the crap. They look for a signal thingy. They get the signal thingy. That's it.
I mean, yeah, at its base, that's what it is. It's really just like if you liked that character from the intel, from that final message, and you were curious about her, you'll enjoy this. If you wanted something much more, yeah, it's skippable in that regard. I personally loved it.
To be honest, if you give me like a 2-sentence description of the story instead of the story, I would have been happier.
Okay. Next story.
Next story is Breaking Strain, and this is set during the end of the Covenant War.
This was another one I really loved.
Yeah, written by James Swallow, who I know nothing about. And it's definitely a different story, which I appreciated. But it's a shipwrecked UNSC vessel that's basically in this sort of quasi standoff with the colonists of the ship of the place they crashed into.
Yeah, Losing Hand was the name of the colony.
And the fact that Covenant ship is actually coming and nobody knows exactly what's going to happen.
I have to agree. By the way, one of the best stories in the collection. It was really good.
This was actually the only one that I think, giving us the time frame, cheated us a bit because we knew that chances were the Covenant ship was going to be friendly, whereas if we hadn't had that preface telling us when this was set, we wouldn't have known that.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair criticism I hadn't considered.
But the actual stuff is interesting. We get the protagonist is this UNSC officer who basically rose up the ranks because everyone else died, and he's dealing with the fact that he's basically bluffing them. The ship is way worse than the colonists realize, but that's the only thing that's stopping them from possibly killing all the UNSC people. And then he's got a Spartan, which they're all afraid of, but he's actually AWOL.
Yeah.
And actually, that was I think the most interesting in terms of fictional tidbits is that the Spartan 3, it sounded like he might have been basically one of those teams that you see at the end of Lone Wolf, and he was one of the guys who escaped, whereas all his buddies died.
Yeah. Or he's like one of Gauntlet, Red, or Echo that are mentioned at the very end of New Alexandria.
Yeah. You don't get much beyond the fact that he's obviously screwed up, but he's still a Spartan, so he shows up when he needs to. And it turns out when the Covenant ship arrives, it's actually, hey guys, we're actually friends now. It's all cool, and we can evacuate you. And but our UNSC officer decides to stay behind and find.
Because he found some hot outer colony.
Yep, love on the edge of the frontier. This was a more self-contained story that I thought was fun. It was a different angle we get. We've gotten a lot, especially in the Halo 5 trilogy, of what it's like for a lot of these colonists who were left behind. But I think this was a much more focused and thus much more interesting take on that, just because we had the villain who is a dick, but you understand why. And you get to see both sides of the UNSC and the colonists, and they're both right, or they both have reasons for being how they are.
Yeah.
And that's just, they can't get along, and unfortunately, well, fortunately for them, that a ship was going to come out of the sky and luckily stop everything before it got really nasty. But yeah, it was one of the self-contained stories of the collection, and I really liked it as well.
Amen.
And then after Breaking Strain comes Promises to Keep, and this written by Christy Golden.
Oh, this was one of my favorites.
Really?
Oh yeah.
It's we'll get into that, Danny. It's basically a sequel to the Forerunner trilogy, and it's basically after everything in Silentium, after all the bonus stuff that came with Silentium. After the trial of Mendicant Bias, basically the Isodidact and company are just floating around deciding what they're going to do. And so we get a bit of an answer, sort of, into how the domain gets fixed, as well as an end fate for a few more of the characters from the Forerunner saga. So I guess we'll start with you, Danny. What did you think about this?
I think this story typifies and exemplifies how how a lot of people see the difference between Thief 3 and Bungie, actually, believe it or not, because the way the Forerunner trilogy ended, there were a lot of open-ended things there that they didn't go into much detail about because it kept a sense of mystery about a number of elements. We didn't need to know how the domain restarted. We didn't need to know any of this stuff. We didn't need well, here's a little minor story featuring these characters afterwards.
Yeah, because people wanted to know about it.
Yeah, but people wanted to know more about the Forerunners, and then they did that, and then they turned them into a...
It was great. But as a franchise develops, you can't just leave those mysteries alone. You have to...
There was no reason to explore this. There was no reason to introduce this.
You needed to know about why the domain was still around.
No, you did not.
Silentium, they said it was going to be destroyed. We needed to know that.
No, you didn't. This will not change how you viewed it. This will not change how you view Halo 6 either.
It really does for me.
It's completely unnecessary. You take the mystery and you ruin it with a bad story.
Because they've done this before. They'll introduce these things that either seem big or very small in the grand scheme, and then they end up paying off years later.
Oh, but that's they bring it up just because they want to just have an option on the table, and they've no intention of following through. You can't, like I said, what happened with Guilty Spark and the Librarian? Don't tell me their master plan was to wait for 5 years or so until they actually explained that.
Maybe not originally, but once the Reclaimer trilogy became a Reclaimer saga, they suddenly had more opportunities to do a lot more.
But the thing is, this is a lot of hope and aspiration that you're putting on to basically an unnecessary story
based on past experience with this kind of stuff. And even if they never followed up on any of this stuff presented in Promises to Keep, I still absolutely love the story. I loved getting a follow-up on that. I loved going back to Maithrillian and learning what the hell the Organon is and about Abaddon. I wanted that.
It's an unnecessary little thing that they introduced and will never have a payoff because there's no need to introduce it. This is not a story that needed to be told.
It absolutely did. I'm sorry. I have to disagree on a fundamental level.
If it was that important, they wouldn't have just chucked it into something like this.
They didn't chuck it in. It was one of the longer stories in there.
This is how I feel. By the way, I don't actually think that you're wrong, but this seems like this to me. It seems like it's Guilty Spark and Librarian all over again. It just seems like they fleshed out something that no one should have been asking about. We didn't need to have every single mystery colored in because...
Not every single mystery.
Whenever you don't have mysteries anymore, whenever the whole universe is just this black and white, it's not fun, it's not exciting.
Yeah, because that's what real alien races would be like. They're... Especially in a universe like Halo, they're going to be stupid, they're going to make mistakes, they're just as flawed as the rest of us, they're not gods.
Yeah, and that's why I think this story was really about, honestly, because because the whole stuff with the domain is basically, something happens, we go there, and we fix a key, someone dies, but everything gets set, and we're hopeful that it works out. But I don't think that's even really the point, it's that it's much more about dealing with what's it like for these characters. They're basically the last of their race. They have to deal with the fact that they've destroyed everything.
But that's the thing. If it was a story just about those characters dealing with the fallout of the events from the Forerunner trilogy, I really would have liked that. But it's not relevant, and it's just, well, technically the precursors are just a species that were really human and made their own mistakes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and they did.
Yeah, but who gives a stop that?
There's still plenty of mystery. How did they have 100 billion years worth of knowledge, for example? Because there's a lot of mystery on the table for the precursors right now, and it's a lot of fun not only making those theories, but later on either getting them confirmed or denied.
But it takes it further and further away from relevance. You know what I mean? We've built up the story to where it is, and I keep going back, and we don't need to keep going back for these precursor stuff. We don't really need to go back. And I'm just saying we have a literal universe full of interesting new content that we could tap into at any time. New alien races, new technologies, new that you could do. Multiple dimensions, time travel. You have all these conveyances of sci-fi. And they just keep rehashing the same old shit. And just, man, there's some mysteries. What mysteries can we color in today to sell this shit? Rather than just doing some new content, new stories, new anythings. it just feels like they're rehashing and filling in the blanks that no one really needed to be filled in, instead of taking the opportunity to do new stuff. Like I said, even with the story, I would have loved to have seen the story just being about people looking at their own decisions, the Forerunners in their dying state, as it were, just taking a look back at what they could have done wrong or right, or do a social commentary on themselves or anything. But no. There's always a MacGuffin.
I mean, I would. Then you get into the point about how sci-fi is basically all about setting up MacGuffins to explore character stuff. That's basically the point of sci-fi. Is to explore the human condition through yada yada yada. So I think that it's there for a reason, and I don't think it's necessarily destroying any inherent. I mean, the whole point of mysteries is that they're only interesting because you put stuff into them, and that if you color them in, they're never going to be the exact same way that you personally thought they would go, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad.
Do you want to take a bet on whether we'll see Abaddon ever again? Because
yeah, I'll make a bet on that.
I will bet too.
I'll take you up on that, right?
Okay, yes. So divided opinions. Next is Shadow Intent, which we covered on a previous podcast. Joe Staten returns. Exciting.
I really like that story.
Yeah.
Solid story. Yeah.
Then we have The Ballad of Hamish Beamish, which apparently there are opinions on. Divided opinions. And then we get to, I think personally this is my favorite, Defender of the Storm.
Defender of the Storm was really good.
It had no right to be that good, to be fair. It had no right to be that good. I didn't want to enjoy the story, knowing the flat outline of it, but yeah. God, was it good.
I loved it. It really brought, for me, it brought back that fear of the Flood that in a way that I hadn't felt probably since Mona Lisa from Halo Evolutions. So, yeah, good on the author there. I think was
John Jackson Miller, who
yeah, I thought so. Yeah,
who's apparently done some Star Wars stuff, which I've never read.
Yeah, he's done Star Wars. I think he's done Star Trek as well. A couple other sci-fi universes. He's done some really good work overall.
Yeah, I think when I was talking about this on Halo Archive and Halo.bungie.org, I described it as sort of the lower decks of Halo.
Yeah.
Because there's a Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Lower Decks, where for one episode you see things not through the command crew of the flagship, but just the junior officers who are wondering what the hell's going on. And that's really what this feels like. You have a low-ranked foreigner who doesn't know what's going on with the rest of the war that we've seen from...
Basically been forgotten by the universe.
Yeah, and he's like, well, he's not even a great foreigner. He's kind of the average guy who's been left here because he's not even worth shipping off to fight the Flood. But it turns out that he's actually got a job, and he puts himself to use on this he's on a remote...
Gas mine.
Yeah, gas mine, which I wasn't actually... Is it supposed to be like the gas mine above Threshold? Or is
no, that those are... I think the gas mine in Threshold was actually mining the gas from the atmosphere, whereas the one in Defender of the Storm was harvesting exotic particles that helped power ships, Forerunner ships.
Okay, yeah.
So, but I could be wrong about that.
I think so. I think it's just in my mind. I was really trying to set it on that because then I had a frame of reference for where everything was.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, it's not actually harvesting exotic particles at all. It's basically the Forerunner, Adequate Observer. He's even got the most pedestrian name of every Forerunner we've ever heard.
Yeah.
He realizes that they're actually a sentient species in this gas giant, and that if the Flood found them, it would be really bad. And so when the Flood breaks out on his station, he sort of has to go on this one-man crusade with his trusty AI companion, a familiar setup to Halo. But it's just it's a self-contained story. It has twists and turns. It gives you a perspective I don't think we'll regularly ever get. Like you said, there's a few short stories we've gotten with the human side, but
my favorite aspect of this story is how the Flood actually gets on the station, because user the Eld on Reddit really put it well. They get in there basically through the waste, the Forerunner waste, So, people always said that the Flood kind of looked like little walking pieces of shit. In this case, it's literal.
Yes. It's poo monsters all the way down.
What I really enjoyed was the fact that they didn't focus too much on the how and why of the Flood.
Yeah.
It was just a threat. And the fact that we're put into the shoes of a Forerunner and being absolutely helpless, I thought that was really good, because we can't put this light on the Forerunners about their technology and, as them as a people, but they see this one guy just being absolutely scared. And not even knowing what's going on, too, because he thinks the station's for one thing, and we find out it's not exactly what he thought it was as well, and it all literally crumbles down around him. And even the big brave warriors that he kind of admires in terms of their prowess and fighting and battle, and they fall around him. It's interesting, I thought.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that the story sort of ends with, if it were a Master Chief, if it were a main character, it would be a bad ending, but for him, he gets what he wants, basically, which I thought was a nice inversion as well.
Yep.
All right. Okay. And then next is A Necessary Truth, and this is written by Troy Denning, and so it's a sequel to his Last Light. So it follows the characters from that ferret team, so it's the Spartan Threes, Ash, Olivia, and Mark, with their handler, Veda Lopez, and they're on a training exercise that goes awry, as training exercises in fiction always do.
Yep.
This one I think threads the needle for me in feeling self-contained versus feeling it's just a bridge to something else.
Yeah. It was like it could be very self-contained. It wouldn't necessarily need any follow-up, but it was also, it was a nice follow-up to Last Light for those particular characters. And I really hope that Troy Denning gets to come back again, that he gets to do more with these particular characters, because they're a lot of fun, I have to say. I enjoyed seeing them do work together.
I didn't think until I read this that I would find awkward Spartan flirting as interesting and engaging as it was, but just the whole early sequence where all the Spartans are trying to be undercover and working through this training exercise was light and enjoyable and just fun to spend time with these characters, and you get and it's just, that's something, especially in Halo, when everything's giant space weapons of destruction, you don't often get those character moments.
I really didn't like Last Light that much, but I really liked this story. I liked the premise, the setup. I liked the wee character moments. I like Ferret Team. I don't know. I like that a lot more than Last Light. So
I also appreciate that they don't, especially with who's the one who constantly goes crazy, Mark, that they aren't squeaky clean. That they kind of do point out that I did.
He kind of murdered the guy. Yeah, shit.
And I did.
Oh well.
I did think he was a serial killer, and there's reasons for that. So it definitely
take care of the body, please. Just clean up. Just
yeah,
go on.
And it's just the and it's all wrapped up in this. Well, guys, if we hose this, we could be on the line here. We could be dead, tossed out an airlock, disappeared, something like that. So it adds a different flavor, I think, than what you would normally give. Well, it's just a Spec Ops team and something. So I really enjoyed that.
To be fair, if you look at it from a universe perspective, the casual murders that these guys they participate in and involve in and orchestrate is exactly what all the fears of the outer colonists had about the NSC.
No one ever said the outer colonists were wrong.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
This little story comedically confirms a lot of the bad things about the spooky Oni organization. You know what I mean? That they literally have these devils that will go around and murder the out of people.
But to be fair, Mark never intentionally killed anyone. The reporter was killed incidentally when they were attacked by the ex-Oni agent working for a private organization.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of a wet work team crossed with a slight dash of Benny Hill, and when they're like, wait, I thought you did. Wait. Yeah.
Yep.
So it was fun. Move on. Okay. And then next is Into the Fire, which is another one of the stories I don't think is quite self-contained
it's a
because
prologue, but
it's setting up Kelly Gay's upcoming Halo Smoke and Shadow. But we get Halo Wars ties because we follow Rion, who turns out to be Forge's daughter. And we return to...
I groaned at that. I was like, oh, really?
I'm kind of optimized. It's really, to me, I could go either way with it. It's going to depend on what Smoke and Shadow does.
Yeah. For what it was, like for being a prologue, essentially, I felt Into the Fire was probably one of the better prologues in the collection.
Mm-hmm.
Like I saw it coming that she was going to be Forge's daughter, but I had a lot of fun of it. Part of it was definitely the fact that it felt very Firefly. You know, she's like the Rule 63 Malcolm Reynolds in this case, and so
yeah, and it was nice to get
I enjoyed that.
Nice to get back to Venezia and just the whole milieu of Covenant human working there. We get a slight follow-up to events in Mortal Dictata. Sadly, nothing with Cholvan, who I still want to pop up eventually. We'll see if I'm ever satisfied or just disappointed.
Despite the relationship thing, I actually quite like the story. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Yeah, I'm just worried in case you get the whole Star Wars trope where everyone's related to everybody and all the stories focus around the one or two families, you know what I mean?
I don't think we'll have to worry about that yet. We got a ways to go before we hit that.
Hopefully yet isn't actually foreshadowing anything, though.
Rion's actually Luke Skywalker's daughter, and...
oh my god.
So after it comes Saint's Testimony, which we talked about before.
Still think that's one of the best fucking Halo stories we've ever been told, you know that?
Yeah. And I think...
It's that good.
I think for all the people who argue about Cortana turning evil inexplicably, that they really need to read that, and it kind of explains, without talking about Cortana directly, why she would do what she does. I really do like it, and obviously it was your preferred Frank O'Connor offering in this collection.
Indeed.
And then we get to, I think, is my tie for... I really love Defender of the Storm. Coming up right behind it, though, for me, is Rossbach's World, which was written by Brian Reed, Halo 5 lead writer.
Yep. This is probably one of his better... Yeah, this was a pretty decent contribution by him for, in terms of looking at his overall work. And we talked about it before. I have to defend the end of this, because he talks about in one of the Canon Fodder updates, like prior to Fractures coming out, how it would make for more interesting discussion, like if he didn't directly answer that question. And while that's not entirely untrue, I think it is. I think it still is better that we don't get a definitive answer. I think that would have ruined that particular story, if I'm to be honest. I do want to follow up at some point, but it presented all these interesting ideas that they could explore. Does she just destroy all the AI? Does maybe she only save BB and destroy the others? Or, and this is what I really hope ends up happening, does she interview them? And if they choose to go and join Cortana, she lets them go in an act of faith, or in a show of faith, essentially. So
yeah, I appreciate it's because it's following. It basically lets us know what happens to Osmond, Black Box, and Lord Hood right during the events of Halo 5. So they get off, and it's maybe in Halo 6 we'll run over to their place away from home and pick them up, find them in their log cabin. Stop Lord Hood from drinking himself to death. But it's very much a different view of those characters than what we got in Spartan Ops or the Kilo 5 trilogy, because it's really Black Box and Osmond's relationship. And yeah, she's left with this question of, I've got these really important AIs, but they might betray us. Do I destroy them? Do I destroy Black Box? Can I trust them? And I think that the ending where she's deciding whether or not, and you don't know what she decides, works because it basically lets you decide what part of Osmond's character you think is what is fundamentally her. Is she fundamentally this person who's totally into the Oni Kool-Aid and is willing to do what it takes regardless of the cost Or is she just the fact that she thinks about, well, can I let these people go, basically, because she treats the AIs as people. Like, do I let them join Cortana if they want? Like, I can shoot them off and there's no risk to me. It's definitely a side of her character that we haven't gotten, because usually she's being the asshole that Oni heads have to be.
I just hope that we get a resolution to that, because I think it's absolutely lazy. Well, here's the ending. Make it up.
I can understand why people don't like it, but I think it was the better route to go, at least for now. If we never get any sort of follow up, I will agree with you in that regard.
Yeah,
but I think we will.
Yeah, I hope we do, because to be fair, leaving that open is just it's an insult to leave it open. It's like, well, this is her character. This is a very important decision this character's going to make. Bye.
All right, Danny,
like, really?
I'm going to point out that in this podcast, you have now argued that mystery is bad and mystery is good.
Damn right. Hey,
I want the answers. No, don't give me the answers.
There's certain things that you can have as mysteries. I don't think this is an artificial mystery that they set up and create within the story itself, and I think a story needs a resolution.
It's one of those things that I'm fine with in the context of short stories, because they get to play around with the rules of narrative a little more. I can understand your point about wanting the ending, but I think I
just want resolution. You know, I really like resolution. They're fantastic sometimes. Okay. Give me a resolution.
Keyword in your case, sometimes.
Sometimes.
Okay. So then moving on, you've got Oasis, which is another. This is Tobias.
A setup.
Yeah, this is another setup for Tobias Buckel's Halo Envoy. And so this was interesting because, on one hand, I don't feel like there's a lot in it. Like, this is another thing that feels like it really is going to need its novel tie-in to feel whole. On the other hand, I am, without a doubt, Halo the Cold Protocol is my least favorite Halo novel. I've always felt that it is totally extraneous, and like there's just nothing I draw from it, even though it's delving into Grey Team, it's delving into the early life of our favorite character here, our favorite captain, like Keyes, and I've just never really liked it. And then Dirt, I was kind of iffy on too, but I do think that this is probably my favorite Halo contribution he's given. Just that it digs into, we've gotten so much of the rest of this collection is the humans and elites kind of fumbling towards working together, and this is just a story about, no, they can't. Sometimes people just hate each other too much.
Yeah. And I liked that they didn't just say, the humans are good and the elites are bad in this case, which is kind of where you start from, justifiably so from the point of view of that character. But then you meet Jet, I think it was, or Jack. I can't remember the character's name right now. But you meet him and it's like, okay, here we got our example of the good Sangheili, but then you meet the assholes that are trying to incite civil war, and it's like, okay, so the Sangheili aren't all good and all bad. And then at the very end, of course, we get the kind of asshole militia that both saves their lives and then kills the character's, new Sangheili friend. So, like, this very grayscale story, which I absolutely love.
I really wish they didn't kill him at the end, just because that's kind of, when we talk about, like, short stories, that's kind of what I expected to happen. Like, oh, I've learned something about you. You aren't so bad. Now I must die to further home the moral lesson.
I can get that. I can get what you're saying there, but I don't think that's how it really came across. At least for me, that's not how it came across. It came across as this, that I expected him to die, but that's because I knew that this group of humans was as uncompromising as that group of elites that we met in the city prior. So, and then it's like you have this one human girl, and then this one elite that exemplify the ideal. So.
Yeah,
it's a little cliched in that regard, but it's still this very nice story with a lot of shades of gray that at least for me, it worked as a nice self-contained story. Like, if I hadn't been told there's going to be a follow-up, I would say, I would say, oh, that's sad there's no follow-up, but I still enjoyed this story for what it is. since there is a follow-up, I'm looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Denny? We'll move along.
I don't want to repeat some of the nice things and criticisms you guys brought up about the story. I completely agree. It's actually my favorite story from him as well, like you said. So, not much else to say about it.
Okay. All right. So then, moving to the last official story in the collection, Anna Rosa. This was
another one of my favorites. Like, my two top favorites are going to be Promises to Keep and then Anna Rose.
Yeah, and this is
Anna Rosa, sorry.
Yeah, and this is written by another 343 regular, Kevin Grace.
Has had a pretty good history with his personal contributions.
Mm-hmm. And this basically, I think the big takeaway a lot of people have taken from this is that they think it's following, it goes into something we've never seen before, which is how Oni basically gets people to sign over their loved ones for smart AI creation. And I think the big takeaway a lot of people have been calling is that Anna Rosa, the person who's dead and that they're trying to get the brain for the AI, is going to appear in her AI form in Halo Wars 2. I'm not sure if you buy into that or not, Toa.
Oh yeah, I came to that conclusion before posting about, before it was being posted about all over the place. I'd like to think that I actually perpetuated that at the start, because I was like, as soon as those discussion threads opened on our Halo and our Halo story, I said, okay, here's my breakdown. The important thing, Anna Rosa is going to become Isabel. So I know other people came to that conclusion independently, but I'd like to think I was one of the first posting about
Isabel being the smart AI character who's going to appear in Halo Wars 2.
And I mean, and Kevin Grace is writing Halo Wars 2, and the story of Anna Rosa is set in the right time frame that it works, that she would be right at the right age by the setting of Halo Wars 2.
So I think overall this was good. It's another one that gives us stuff from the AI point of view, so you get more of really embellishing what it's like for them and how it's different from a normal person. And just this, I don't think it's something that one of those stories I like, because I never actually really thought about, like, how did they get the brains? Did they just, how did?
Yeah.
So there's actually, and they mention basically like, well, we could just steal this, but they're trying to, they at least initially play it on the up and up. Yeah.
How much you want to bet though that Oni employees sign their brains away when they sign up?
Probably, just in case.
Yeah.
And so I liked it a lot as this was definitely one that felt like a self-contained story that works well. And if that Halo Wars 2 connection works, it's a nice aha moment, but it doesn't change anything in this story.
It's also a good and unique sort of story that I think that it's a story that the Halo can tell. It's a story that you could only tell within Halo, because of the way we set up the universe, and the way AIs work.
Yeah, and so then actually at the final, that's Anna Rosa is the final story officially, but then at the very end there's an untitled and uncredited story that that doesn't have a name, obviously, but it details basically what happens to the isodidact and Chant to Green. And I really liked it. It was the only weird thing about this is basically the isodidact and Chant to Green, which was once something I liked from Promises to Keep, is that they have this relationship and they're both like, well, is it just grief or because she's like the new life shaper or whatever? And I really like the didact, or is this something on our own? And they really come to the realization that, well, they like each other, separate from their roles, separate from who they are. And they basically end up raising their son on this random rock out somewhere to live out. Everyone else is
the rest
gone.
Of their days naturally.
Yeah, and
can I just point out that that's a terrible thing to do? That poor guy is going to grow up. His parents will die. He'll be alone in the middle of nowhere and hate his life.
There is something to say about that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, except when you realize, like, and you're leaving your son as the last of his species, like, with no contact.
Unless they're going to do like an Adam and Eve thing.
Yeah, that was the weird thing. And then some people were saying, well, they left the ship they came in, so I guess he could fly off. And it's like, yeah, but it seems like they just left it there to rot, so who knows if it's going to be functional?
Oh, it was still functional at the very least in that story.
Yeah.
So, and we know Forerunner technology is incredibly resistant. I mean, the ship that particular ship was the Audacity, which at that point was already
really old.
10,000 years old, probably over 10,000 years old by the point, at the very least by the time of Promises to Keep, and then older, obviously, by the time of that fight of the uncredited end story.
Well, and so leaving aside the possible dark ending for the son, I do think it seems like it does seem like this is probably the last we're going to get for Chantigreen and the Isodidact. And I think that it was a fitting send off. They basically decide, all right, we're done with the AIs, we're done with the power armor, we're done with all our fancy stuff. We're just gonna live simply and tell our son these fables, basically, of big battles in space and stuff. And it seemed like a really quiet ending that fit the characters after all they've been through.
Gotta agree. It was a nice cap to his particular journey.
Yeah. The end of his great journey.
Yes. That was perfect
Lovely
timing there.
Musical
Yeah.
cue there,
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the end of Fractures. I think we all went through, picked our favorites and least favorites. Anything else to end before we wrap it up?
Just kind of a repeat of the story. Evolutions overall is the better anthology series, but Fractures stands out on it for its own reasons, I think.
Yeah.
It could have been better, but for what it is, I think it's still pretty good.
Yeah, I think it was an enjoyable romp.
I can't imagine a Halo fan to pick up this book and be disappointed. There's no way that would happen.
Yeah, not 100. You could be disappointed with individual stories, as we've definitely heard. But
yes.
I think overall, it's everyone's going to be able to find at least something they love in here.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Toa, for coming on and arguing with Danny for me.
It has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, and you can subscribe to this via iTunes or check this out on YouTube at youtube.com/dawn. We'll also have show notes at forwarduntodawn.com. We'll put links to the stuff we've talked about, to Toa's channel, Halo Canon. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.